This is Yair Davidiy speaking to you from Jerusalem, the capital of Israel, speaking to you on behalf of Brit-Am Hebrew Nations. Our organization finds that lost tribes amongst Western nations. We prove this from biblical sources and from historical sources. And today we're going to discuss very briefly the understanding that the Jews in the Second Temple period, just before the destruction of the Second Temple, and after it, in the land of Israel, the so-called area of Palestine, had an idea that the lost tribes were in the British Isles or in the western area, and so did the pagan nations, and so did the Arabs, or more precisely, the Arab Jews, the Jews of Arab lands, also had this understanding. And this was even though that a good portion of the tribes of Israel had not yet reached the British Isles. Just to recapitulate very briefly, lost tribes were conquered by the Assyrians. A portion of the tribes were taken directly into captivity by Phoenicians and Philistines, Minoans, and they had a maritime empire, one could say, and they, together with the Phoenicians, took Israelite captives to the west, to the areas of Spain and the British Isles and Gaul. Those who went to Spain, a good portion of them went to Spain, later moved to Ireland and to Britain, and this has been proven by archaeology and also by mythology and by other sources. And so a good portion of them reached the British Isles, including Ireland, in this fashion. Another portion of them, or the majority of the Israelite tribes, were taken into exile by the Assyrians, and they're taken overland to Hala, Habor, and Nahar Gozan, the river of Gozan, a place called Hala, a place called Habor, also the cities of the Medes, to areas in south of the Caucasus Mountains, and also in present-day Iran and all that region, on the fringes of the Assyrian Empire. And from there they linked up or became identified with the Cimmerians, with the Cimmerians and the Scythian peoples, and the Goths, or the Gutis, so-called Guti at that time, became identified with them, federated with them, and together evolved with them, one could say, moved with them to the north and to the west. And there was in stages, and an early stage of these migrations was that connected with the Cimmerians, who went through the Balkans and also from the north to Western Europe, where they merged with the so-called Hallstatt civilization and early Celtic cultures, so-called Celtic cultures, and moved, and were also to be found shortly afterwards in the regions of Switzerland, of Gaul, that is present-day France, also Spain, Britain, and Ireland, and this all happened 200, 300 BCE. Sorry, happened in the period 700 to 200 BCE. But there was another movement, a later movement of peoples who absorbed Germanic culture, so-called Germanic culture, with the Angles and the Saxons and the Vikings, the peoples of Scandinavia, and they came much later. And at that time, the time when we're speaking of the Second Temple period, they were not yet in the British Isles, though a good portion of the Israelite nations already were. And so this is what we're about to discuss, the knowledge that the ancient peoples had of the Israelites, of the 10 tribes being in that region. You will recall there were 12 tribes of Israel. These 12 tribes split into two different sections. The northern section was taken into exile by the Assyrians and lost consciousness of its ancestry. These are the 10 tribes of Israel. They were the majority of the Israelite people, and they are the people we're looking for. A correspondent of ours, Mark Williams, sent us an extract from Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews, where Josephus paraphrases the prophecy of Balaam, the pagan high priest, in the book of Numbers, chapters 24 to 26, prophesied concerning the Israelite nations in the end times. And from these prophecies we may discern where the lost 10 tribes are. So this prophecy of Joseph mentions Israelites being in the Isles, which at that time would have included the areas of islands of Ireland and Britain. And so this is an indication that already in the Second Temple period the Jews had an inkling that the lost 10 tribes were in that region, and this suggestion is substantiated by other evidence. Also, the pagans at that time, the pagans, the Gentiles, the non-Israelites, in their own way, in their own fashion, had mythological conceptions that indicated they too believed the lost 10 tribes were in the West, in the British Isles. They identified the Jews and also the Israelites. Israelite was identified with Saturn, the so-called also called Cronus. The idea existed that Saturn or Cronus had been demoted from where he was in the land of Israel, and he had moved first to Italy and from there to the British Isles, and he and his followers were still to be found in the British Isles. So this is in effect saying that the lost 10 tribes were in that region. We have articles on this subject, and also a few talks explaining it. But this is the essence of what the claim is, and this claim is backed up with additional proofs. We also have the idea, Jews having spoken of the lost 10 tribes. In Jewish mythology, Jewish folklore, legends and so on, the Jews are associated with the sons of Moses and with the Rechabites, descendants of Rechab, from the descendants of Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses. And so the lost 10 tribes are linked up with the sons of Moses and with the Rechabites, and they were said to be in the islands of the blessed. Isle of the blessed meant island, Isles of the blessed meant both Ireland and Britain. And the other sources that are such as Jewish Arab sources, and also Arabic sources borrowed from the Jews or derived from Jewish prototypes that say the same thing in different ways. One of these sources says that the 10 tribes the 10 tribes of the sons of Moses were in Gebalk, which is meaning Gaul in the west. And so this ties in with what we were saying. And also the pagan sources also said that in addition to being in the Isles of Britain, the descendants of the Titans, who were the brothers of Saturn, were also to be found in Gaul and the related regions, and in effect amongst the so-called Celtic peoples. And the Arab sources are borrowed from the Jews. They said that Ad, who had been in the eastern section of the land of Israel, Ad had a brother named Hod. Hod represents Judah. It's another name for Judah, Hod. So Hod had come to Ad and asked him to repent, and Ad had refused. So great wind came and blew Ad and his descendants away, and they were to be found in the islands of the blessed. The islands of the blessed were, as we said, was another name for Ireland and Britain. So this in its own way was saying the lost 10 tribes were in that region. And Ad is reflected even in British legends. Ad probably derives from a root in Aramaic, Hebrew, meaning exile, the exile. And Ad, or as a similar name, might be a coincidence, but the similar name of Aid in Welsh and Irish legend, and say that Britain was once called Aedon in honour of Ad, and that Britain was named after Predon, the son of Aid the Great. In other words, Aid was considered one of their ancestors, and this might be there could be a connection because the names are almost identical. At all events, they are saying in practice the same. The message is the same. And in addition to that, we have the extract sent to us by Mark Williams concerning Josephus. Josephus lived in the period 37 CE to 100 CE. He's also known as Yosef ben Mattatyahu. He was a scholar. He lived in the time of the destruction of Jerusalem and the Second Temple. He was also from a priestly aristocratic family. He had been a leader of the revolt against the Romans, and he saved his life by prophesying to the Roman emperor, or prophesying giving a prophecy, ingratiating himself, one could say, and also showing certain insights that saved his life. And so he became a favourite of Vespasian. Vespasian elevated him, kept him as a hostage and an interpreter, and eventually, after that, he granted him his freedom. and Josephus wrote several works. The best known of these works are the Jewish War, concerning the Jewish revolt against the Romans, and also the Antiquities of the Jews, which gives an account of Jewish history as he understood it, and it follows in large measure the biblical story, but he adds additional traditions and impressions, and he gives us information or indications that additional information existed that we would not have if it was not for this. And one of the points which we found of interest is the prophecy of Balaam. So Balaam was a pagan priest who was hired by Balak, the king of Moab, to come and curse Israelites. The story of Balaam is found in the book of Numbers, chapters 22 to 25, and it gives the story of Balaam. Balaam came to curse Israel, but he could not curse. Instead of cursing, he gave a blessing. And these blessings were prophecies, and from these prophecies we see how it was considered that how was prophesied, predicted how the Israelites would develop, and these prophecies fit or conform to the history of the British and related nations. He foresaw, Balaam predicted or indicated the future division between Judah and the 10 tribes in Numbers 23:7. He said that the Israelites would be a nation who would be counted alone, and not with other peoples, so would not be subject to the same limitations as the others are. See 23:9 and Numbers 23:9. The Israelites would be above other peoples, though bearing heavier responsibilities. There would be an innumerous people. They could not be counted, a very great multitude. See 23:10. They were to receive an unconditional blessing. This blessing given unto them was without conditions. See 23:8. And also 23:19 to 20. A portion of these Israelites would be governed by a monarch. They would have monarchical rule. A king would be over them. See 23:21. The symbols would include a lion, 23:24. Also chapter 24 verse 9. And a unicorn. See 23 verse 22. And also chapter 24 verse 8. And this description of the Israelites being represented by a lion and a unicorn, this is what is to be found on the British coat of arms. Israelites were to dwell according to their tribes, Numbers 24:2, and in fertile, rich areas, Numbers 24:6. They would be in many waters, they would be in every sea, and to rule the waves. They would rule the waves as Britain did and now America does. 24 verse 7. They would defeat Edomite nations such as Edom and Japan. See Numbers 24 verse 9. The Canaanites, the Rechabites, would be exiled along with the 10 tribes and returned alongside them. See 24:22. Especially according to our interpretations and the commentaries from Rashi that we bring on this subject, and also our own remarks. And all of the above indications, characteristics of the Israelites, they are pertinent to the Israelites. They are pertinent to identify the Israelites with the British and related nations. And this is what happened. This is how they developed. They were blessed. They were blessed compared to other people who were blessed. They were more or less separate from other nations. They considered themselves separate. They still considered separate. All the nations of the world either hate or admire them, but they are different. Everyone acknowledges that they are different. They are considered different. They consider themselves different. A monarch does the rule over part of them. The British are ruled by monarchs. So are other Israelite nations such as the Netherlands, Luxembourg, Denmark, and Norway, Sweden. All of these nations have, and Belgium, and all of these nations have kings or queens over them, monarchs. They also, the British section of the Israelite nations are represented by a lion and a unicorn. And Britain did rule the waves, now America does. And they did defeat the Edomite nations of Germany and Japan in the Second World War. And so all of these indications are found in the prophecies of Balaam, and they were fulfilled. And so we also have Josephus, a paraphrase of the prophecy of Balaam. He wrote his own version of what Balaam said, and it follows the biblical, what is written in the Bible, but there's additions to it. Josephus says that the Israelites would be not only on the continent, but also in the isles. which meaning the islands of Ireland and Britain, according to our understanding. We'll read out now the what Josephus says, just the version of the prophecy of Balaam according to Josephus. Then it is from, I remind you, if you want to look it up, Flavius Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews, book 4, chapter 4, section 6. And it says, then said he, happy is the people, this is Balaam speaking according to Josephus, on whom God bestows the possession of innumerable good things, and grants them his own providence to be their assistant and their guide, so that there is not any nation among mankind but you will be esteemed as superior to them in virtue, and in the earnest prosecution of the best rules of life, and of such as are pure from wickedness, and will leave those rules to your excellent children, and thus out of the regard that God bears to you, and the provision of such things for you as may render you happier than any other people under the sun. You shall return that land to which he has sent you, and it shall ever be under the command of your children. And both all the earth as well as the seas shall be filled with your glory. And you shall be sufficiently numerous to supply the world in general, and every region of it in particular, with inhabitants out of your stock. Happy, however, O blessed army, wonder that you have become so many from one father. And truly the land of Canaan can now hold you as being yet comparatively few. But know you that the whole world is proposed to be your place of habitation forever. The multitude of your posterity also shall live as well in the islands, as well as on the continent, and that more in number than the stars of heaven. And when you have become so many, God will not relinquish the care of you, but will afford you an abundance of all good things in times of peace, with victory and dominion in times of war. May the children of your enemies have an inclination to fight against you, and may they be so hardy as to come to arms and to assault you in battle, for they will not return with victory, nor will their return be agreeable to their children and wives. To so great a degree of valor will you be raised by the providence of God, who is able to diminish the affluence of some and to supply the wants of others. So this is what Josephus says, and it is worth considering in the light of the other points that we brought up. The lost tribes were in the West. That is the bottom line. The Bible says that is where they would be, and that is where they are. And it would seem that both the pagans and Jewish scholars had an intuitive understanding that this was the case even in their own time. May the God of Israel bless all of us. Thank you.